often strikes me that people, in general, have a very strange idea about nuns. They think they have to be withdrawn and very pious and very holy, walking around without looking at what's happening all around them. And I honestly believe that this is very far from the truth. A nun should be someone who is very close to people, and she has feelings and emotions the same as everybody else. I think perhaps in latter years these barriers have been really broken down to a certain extent, but it is a great mistake to think that a nun is something different from other human beings.
I never really knew I had a vocation, but during secondary school I often thought about it.
I had a great social life, you know, I had boyfriends and I was out every weekend, every night, this type of thing. But there was still something missing, and I didn't know what.
I never really gave it very much attention, and I didn't want to think about it. At the same time, it wasn't that easy to get rid of it, and it kept on coming back.
My father just said to me that if I ever did anything so stupid, that he would disown me, and that I wouldn't be welcome back in the house again.
A nurse, a social worker and a teacher. 3 nuns, 3 different occupations, but with one thing in common. That's their faith and conviction.
Just as a married woman wears a ring to show people that she loves her husband, I wear a ring to show people that I am trying to love Christ. And in the jeweller shop where I bought the ring, they don't sell silver rings. It had to be made, and I had to try on the wedding rings to get my fit. But I really found it hard that day, buying the ring for myself on my own. It was a little pang.
Now, we can well understand that becoming a nun can't be an easy decision for any girl to take, and of course traditionally we're inclined to expect her to enter a convent straight out of school. But nowadays it's becoming more and more common for a girl to spend some years working or training for a career. This might be looked upon as marking time before finally making up her mind about the religious life.
There was things about the life that attracted me, and there was other things that I found very unattractive. And I couldn't make up my mind definitely by the time I did Leaving Cert. So I went on and did nursing and was lucky to get a vacancy for training. And during that time I was working with sisters. I lived a very normal life for the 3 years that I was a student nurse and thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was only now and again that I used to give consideration to what I would do in the future. I used to forget about it and try and forget about it and live as normal a life as I could, and none of the girls could pick out any difference, I'd say, between me and themselves. But I could myself that I wasn't satisfied with what I had and what I was doing, and I wanted something more. And I always felt that maybe, even though I didn't like nuns, that life definitely had something more than the life I was living at the time. So by the time I had my general training nearly finished, I had given a lot of thought to it, and I felt that I would have to try it before I did much more, and if I tried it and failed, well, I could go away and live a normal life again and just forget about it. But as it happened, I tried it and liked it.
When I decided to enter religion, the one thing that I really was very anxious about was how I would tell my father. And so I chose what I thought was a very opportune moment, and I gradually came to the point and told him. He tried not to show by his face his reaction, because I think it was one of utter disbelief. So he didn't put many obstacles in my way, but he just said, very well, if that's what you think, but give it a try anyway. And later I heard that he wasn't the slightest bit worried, because he was so sure that I'd never stay in a convent. And he used to visit me every Sunday, and each Sunday he would come and he'd say, now, are you sure? You mustn't be afraid, because if you feel like coming out, don't hesitate. I think he really thought that I was just trying to stick it out. But eventually I did, and I think he was quite happy in the end that I did.
And I had everything planned, and everything was organised. And I went home and told my family. My father isn't Catholic, my mother isn't practicing. And when I broke the news to them, my father just said to me that if I ever did anything so stupid, that he would disown me, and that I wouldn't be welcome back in the house again. So I'm afraid that sort of threw me. At 18 I really couldn't take the loss of my family and home, So I decided to forget the idea for a while. I went to teacher's training and I graduated from there. And I was working for 5 years in Toronto. I had a good job. Eventually I had my own apartment, my own car, and still there was something. I wasn't completely satisfied. It was during a party during the second year, Christmas party, and we were all having a great time. And there was a lull in the party, and we were having drinks and eating, and I was sitting on the floor beside the hi-fi, and the idea of entering was always there, but it was something now that I didn't want. I was happy with the life I was leading. I thought it satisfied everything. So the idea of entering a convent wasn't, sort of in my mind at that point. But it was during this party, the song Daisy Dorata, the one that's half a poem, half song. Someone put that on, and I was sitting, within earshot. And I don't remember the exact words or what happened, but I broke up into tears in the middle of the party. And I just left the room, because whatever words came out, I knew that I had to say yes to the Lord.
This is what I always wanted to be from the time I was a little girl. And I'd say too, that vocation was fostered in our home. Like the idea of being a nun was something that was thought highly of by my parents. When it came to, we'll say, the time that I was doing my leaving cert, and the nuns would be talking about, what you're going to do next year, and this was something I never talked about at home. And of course I said that I would like to be a nun, and so I went along to meet the sisters in Limerick, the Reverend Mother, and what I saw there and the people I met I said I'd like to be one of them.
So for some, the call came very gradually, and sometimes there were difficulties and opposition to be faced up to. But for others, the way was smooth. Yet for all of them, there was this sense of adventure ahead.
I took a leap in the dark, because that is what it really was for me. I had no guarantee that I would be happy, or no guarantee that it really was even what I wanted. But I discovered that I was very happy.
You can be certain that girls who've spent some years working, even as nurses or teachers, will find that life in a religious community will take quite a bit of getting used to.
Days are kind of routine, and I get tired of the conversation is one thing. I like a good, to be able to have a good conversation with people, and when you're living with the same people all the time, it can get monotonous. When I was a student nurse, we used to go out in groups and go to a lot of dances and mix around socially and go to parties and lots of things like that, and boyfriends were a natural part of that picture. But now, living in a convent and having a variety of different interests, I don't miss them that much, but I do miss male company and being able to, have chat to people generally, and being in women's company all the time I find a bit tiresome because I was used to such a mixture.
It's a healthy sign that sisters can speak frankly about the ups and downs of convent life. They can be very honest too about the things in the outside world that they've had to give up, things they miss.
Oh, I miss my freedom very much, and being able to, when I have, say, like my days off, being able to decide I'm going to go somewhere, that I'm going to go home or I'm going to go away somewhere with a couple more girls for a weekend, and being able to pack my bags and go. I miss that terribly. And not being able to go places like go to pictures and on outings that I would have gone on before and that I would still like to go on. But I don't have the free choice in these things anymore, and I have to do without things like that.
I suppose maybe the family more than anything. It isn't a substitute in any way, but I have a lot of male friends, priests and lay people, and it's good because I can talk to them. We can, just enjoy each other's company. I think it's the kids mostly, I see them in the streets, and you see the babies and twins, and there's always a pull, at the heartstrings. Oh, they're great,
Particularly at the beginning of my religious life, I did feel like opting out on one or two occasions when the ideal that was presented before me seemed very difficult and seemed something that I would never be able to arrive at. And the thing that helped me during these times of difficulties was the support of the members of my own community, people who were ready to listen and to advise and to help. I would love to have a home of my own, a husband and a family, and I did miss very much the security and the affection and the love of one single person. And this is something very good and something legitimate. But then again, for me, deep down in my heart, I know that I have found someone else, not just something else, but someone else, Christ.
People sometimes react in quite an odd way to the term community life, almost as if it were some strange and extraordinary existence. But when you come to think of it, isn't community life to be seen in every normal family? And we're all familiar with the ups and downs, the restrictions, all the worries and the joys too. Well, it's just the same for sisters in a convent.
When you're living together with other people, even if it's only a small group of 12 or a big group of 30, you have, especially women, you have different characters, personalities coming in. And you can have problems, but there's also, the aspect of building up. If you're feeling low, there's someone around who'll feel with you or try to cheer you up. If you're feeling, if you have something to share with them, if there's a joyful moment, there's someone around that you can share it with. There's a feeling of home, of belonging.
Living in a community, to my mind, is very much like living in a family. And anyone who belongs to a big family would probably know what I'm talking about. But then, of course, you haven't got the ties of blood, the kinship that's there in an ordinary family, in the natural relationship that's there. And therefore it's going to be a little bit different because you'll come across very different kinds of people, different backgrounds, different outlooks about things. So obviously there'll sometimes be disagreement and even arguments about things, but of course that's all very healthy. And I think it's all part of life, it's all part of society in general, that you're going to come up against people who are different in outlook. But I think maybe the important thing to keep in mind is that we all have a common aim. So we have a common purpose. If we're living together in community, and incidentally community is of the essence of religious life, you wouldn't have religious life without it. I think the fact that we're all working for God, building up His kingdom and bringing the good news, I think that links us together in a way that nothing else could, and therefore makes for a large sense of unity that you wouldn't get, I think, in any group that hasn't got that common aim, and I suppose more important than anything else, the consecration. That, I think, would be the most important factor in building community. The fact that we're all consecrated people, we have a common purpose, we pray together, and the prayer, of course, is the source of our living. Daily Mass together gives us a strength, maybe to endure, very often to put up with one another, because it's as simple as that sometimes. And then, of course, we share so many other things like recreation, even watching television and things like that, sharing meals together. All of that, I think, has to produce a bond where we can live very happily together.
I live in community. I have people around me that I know care for me, care about me. I'm sharing my life with them, they're sharing their life with me.
I spent a lot of my life in a very small community, and you almost x-ray one another psychologically. You get to know everything about them, and it can be difficult on occasions. But in the living through tensions and difficulties, you gain a tremendous understanding of one another and a great love for one another. Yeah, I thought there would be a lot more disadvantages and flaws in religious life than that I have found. There were times when I was very disillusioned, all right, by living with the sisters, but as I grew to learn more about myself and how unpleasant I can be to live with, I have grown more tolerant of others, and on the whole I find it very fulfilling, and that I can, it provides what I need to be happy.
So nuns get along together very much the same way as the rest of us. Of course, there have been changes in convent life over the past few years, and for one older nun, probably for the better.
Well, as to changes, the first one and the most controversial, I suppose, is dress. What do we wear? Well, this began way back with Vatican II. It isn't just a recent phenomenon. And the moment it was discovered that when we were not enclosed, that a nun was nearly strangled getting off the bus by her rosary beads, people recognised that something would have to be done. And then, as well as that, as the young nuns were driving, we needed lateral vision. And in the old frilly bonnet and long robes, that was impossible. This didn't altogether meet with approval, as I found out the other day when a priest came to visit me. He hadn't seen me for many years, and he was on the missions. So at the door he asked for me, and I answered the door, and I didn't recognise him, and he didn't recognise me. I said, "Father, I'm it." He crossed the threshold, and he said in some dismay, "Lord, look at the cut of you." So he was used to me in the frilly bonnet and the long robe, and now he sees me in the pinafore, the navy pinafore and the nylon legs, and he doesn't know what to make of it. I would like to say that there's one unchanging thing. If you were to ask a young nun now why she entered religion, I think her answer would be very much the same as mine. There might be talk about transcendence or immolating yourself for souls, or even saving your own soul, working in the third world. But I think I prefer what the late Dom Eugene Boylan said when he was asked that question. I see him still on television with the big facade of the Abbey behind him, and they said to him, "Why did you enter now?" And whipping off his spectacles, he said, "Well, you know, I fell in love with God." And I think that's the same. The young novice entering now would say that too, just as I would have said it. Because it's a love thing. It's one, and that relationship, I would say, is the same now as it was when I entered.
A nun's life isn't all work and praying. They need time to relax, and they manage to spend their leisure hours in a variety of ways, and with great enjoyment.
Well, it's essential for us all to have leisure activities. I, in particular, I get great satisfaction out of taking the brush in my hand and just dipping it into a big jar of paint and just swishing it across the paper and then letting it drip down and then creating something beautiful out of that. That in itself gives me great satisfaction. When I've a little longer time, like during holiday times, I can always go to the pottery studio in the school where I can get a lump of clay and just give it a good squeeze up and then put it on the wheel and make a nice pot. It's tremendous.
I like playing tennis. I like walking. Cycling when I have time. And if it's sort of during the winter at night, I'm the type of person that can read and watch TV at the same time. I'm learning to knit and do all the conventional things like crocheting and embroidery.
We work hard, and therefore we have to have leisure, and we enjoy our leisure. And the question is, what do we do with our leisure? Perhaps we might play games. Here we're keen enthusiasts in badminton. We try to get in a game of badminton every weekend anyway. And there are some who love knitting. There are others who make dolls, or others who do a lot of creative work. We need to always be doing something. We're quite happy to sit back and relax in front of a fire and chat away an hour or so and enjoy ourselves. And we have great fun. Some people seem to think nuns don't have any fun, but we have great fun. Well, we have our chatty people, we have the people who tell the stories, we have the people who can turn anything into fun. We've people who often act the clown for us. And I think that we have a very wide variety, really, of fun. Simple fun. Not fun that needs money to buy it or anything like that.
There's often talk these days about the generation gap, but as we all know, young and old people quite often get on very well together. You see it every day in normal family life, and it's exactly the same in a convent. There are young nuns and old nuns.
I feel somewhat of a fraud because though I am retired from teaching for 2 or 3 years, I'm not at all retired from life. I turn an honest penny as provincial archivist, and I still keep my interest in things academic. So that I wouldn't at all like to be regarded as a sort of benevolent Methuselah towards the younger nuns, because in religion it isn't like that. There are, as everybody knows, there are young old people and old young people, and I don't recognise any generation gap. I wouldn't have the heart or the courage or the nerve to give advice to a younger nun. She'd be much more likely to give it to me. The reason I think I'm very sympathetic towards the young nuns is that I had so many of them in school, and having taught them, known their difficulties, known their idealism, known their aspirations, and with my very real love for them, I see them as they are, and what may not be immediately obvious. Now, some older nuns might perhaps have a rather critical attitude towards them because of their very difference. I don't have it myself, fortunately, because of that reason. But with the old nuns, they have a real relationship. They're tender with them, they're kind, they're understanding. I think they regard them as their grannies. And they're splendid cooks, of course, I must say that, whereas the older generation, and it's been much more to our advantage to have studied a little home economics, as I said, whereas they know how to cook, they know everything about a house, they know how to mend a fuse, things that we never saw a fuse because it wasn't in our line. Everything was so departmentalised. In the olden days, I would stand at the breakfast table with my eyes cast down, my hands folded, and if the kitchen went on fire, if the cook dropped dead, I wouldn't move. Whereas now a young one would be in, giving first aid to the cook. She would be putting out the fire. They're much more practically minded than we are. But that doesn't make them any less endearing, any less exasperating than any other member of the community.
The older sisters are the ones that they have more time to be interested in us, and they have free time, they're around the convent, and they look to us a lot for reasons to keep going, I'd say, themselves. They see the future of the community being carried on in our hands, and they're very interested in us getting on and staying, I suppose, and being happy, and they think about us a lot, and probably they're around with us more than the sisters who are full-time in school or full-time nursing, and like they've seen it all and they've been through it all, and they can look back on it now, and I suppose it keeps them young as well.
I know that I can always go to them and talk to them and they'll understand. And even the part of loving Christ, to a lot of us it can be up in the air, I love Christ and I know Christ loves me. But to them, when you're with them, when you're talking with them, when you see them, their relationship with Christ is real. He's someone very real. As one old nun said to me, he's the only man who'll never let you down.
And now we come to the very centre point of each sister's existence, and this is prayer. How do they pray? Well, they're all very individual women, and each one finds her own personal and private approach to prayer.
With the community as a whole, we say the Divine Office together, and we have Mass daily mass together, and we say prayers like the Rosary. But then we all spend time on our own, either all the nuns together in the chapel, like morning meditation, but there's time during the day when we are free to go and pray wherever we like. You can go out in the garden and walk around, or go to your own room, and it doesn't matter where you go, but to spend some time praying anyway. And the type of prayer you do at that time is totally up to yourself.
To me, prayer is maybe the one most important factor in religious life. There just wouldn't be a religious life without it. It's the first thing. When we pray, first of all, we're linking ourselves with God. Our whole vocation has come from God. Our response is to Him. And prayer is like the spring from which we draw the strength that we need for living religious life. Through prayer, we're in constant communication with God. And prayer, too, is far more than just kneeling down at certain times and saying prayers. One way we describe prayer in our way of life is that it is finding God in all things. And I think that integration of life and actual prayer time is an important ideal to aim at in religious life. It's not easy to achieve, I think, but to aim at it. Because finding God in all things means that you are in touch with God, whether you're working in a classroom, whether you're just chatting to somebody, whether you're actually praying, whether you're watching television, or whatever.
I think really it would be quite true to say that one would wish to pray at all times. And I pray in the most extraordinary circumstances. I pray in the church, naturally, but I like to pray just during the day, whenever I'm doing anything. Even in the middle of a class, very often I'm actually praying. I find that it's very easy to turn to God in all sorts of difficulties. But perhaps the place where I find easiest to pray, might seem ridiculous to say this, but I love to go, during the summer, it's the only opportunity I have of doing this, but out to the very edge of the sea, the seashore, and just there, I really was contemplate more than prayer, but I find the majesty of the sea, the calmness of the ocean, and even when it isn't calm, I find God is very, very close to me there. And I find it terribly easy to pray in that particular setting, perhaps the easiest of all.
So, the sisters can be quite different in their approach to prayer. And how do they see God?
God, to me, God is very real in my life. God is a loving Father. I am aware of the relationship that I have with God as a father and a child. And I trust Him as I would trust my own father. I talk to my Father, and that's what prayer is for me, a conversation with God, a listening, being attuned to God, knowing what He wants me to do, giving time to God in my life. I suppose, first of all, one's whole life is a prayer, because prayer just isn't talking or words. But then again, there are moments that we set aside during the day for this personal, private prayer, times of silence and solitude. We go apart, either in the chapel or one's room, or just even to be alone, to be away, to think and to reflect. And when I talk to God, I come before Him as a child, and if there are distractions or things in my life, worries, anxieties, I come to Him with all these. I bring the whole me to God, my Father, who knows me and knows all about me.
It would be quite wrong to think nuns never have any difficulty with prayer. Of course they do, many times, like everybody else.
I find it very hard to concentrate on praying for any length of time. Some days I can, depending on the mood I'm in, and more days I can't. But I try, and I find that, spiritual reading something, a passage out of scripture, something, can help. And it has become more of a necessity in my life. I mean, my day would make no sense to me now if I didn't pray, or at least if I went for a couple of days or weeks and got careless. Things would begin to make no sense to me, and I'd begin to ask myself, what am I doing here anyway? And things would get very boring, and I'd begin to get fed up and ask myself, what is it all about? And the answer comes from myself eventually. I don't have to ask anybody. I know that I'm not praying, and I have found out that that's the only thing that makes any sense of my life now.
But despite the difficulties, every sister knows in her heart that Christ is the centre of her life.
He's the one person that doesn't change, and that is all important. And even though I change towards him, and some days I'm attentive and more days I don't seem to take any notice of him, he's always there to come back to.
How many of us have ever really stopped to think about the work nuns do? Perhaps we take it all a little for granted. Or maybe we imagine nuns have nice, tranquil lives, saying prayers behind convent walls and far away from reality. Well, nothing could be further from the truth.
I look after severely mentally handicapped children. They are all severely mentally handicapped. Some of them are physically handicapped with that and can do absolutely nothing for themselves. We get them up every day. We leave no child in bed. We get them all out of their beds and take them to a large playroom and out in the open when it's fine, or in the summer in weather permitting. They're inclined to misbehave. Hyperactive children, and I have quite a number of these, never stop all day, every minute of the day, running and jumping. If they're very, very difficult to manage. And they seem to be the type of child that's coming into these severely handicapped units more than the quieter in their child, because they can be looked after in their own home. They see when you love them very, very much, and you get a great surprise when you see this smile coming back, or this little change in their attitude. You know that you're giving them some little shove on in life. I think that the poorest of the poor, and I don't know where you would find poorer, because they're really destitute of their own mental stability, or they need to be protected all the time from themselves and from others. And 'tis pathetic, really. I have drawn myself so close to them that I would feel it hard if I was pulled away from them.
Sisters come face to face with unsavoury aspects of society far more often than the average person. They tackle problems most of us tend to ignore. Work with dropouts and alcoholics, for example.
I got to know these people well, and I discovered that even though they weren't shaved and that they were dressed in rags and they had lost all contact with their own families, and some of them had even changed their names, I discovered that they were really good, genuine, nice people. And I knew for sure that Christ had a role for them to fill and a place for them in life, other than tramping the roads. And I said to myself that one day, somewhere, somehow, I'd have a place for them, that they could go to work from and come home at night to a good fire and a good meal, somebody to give them encouragement and hope, and somebody to love them. I knew nothing about alcoholism at the time, or the destructive powers of the bottle. But I knew that there was a void in these people's lives that they were trying to fill with alcohol when it could only be filled with the love of God and the love of other people.
Our traditional view of nuns probably imagined that they were far too holy to get involved with anything as unpleasant as dropouts and alcoholics, which is very far from the truth. How did this sister get involved?
They started coming into the convent, drunk and sober, late and early. And I suppose they became a nuisance, and I became a nuisance with them, because we were always in the way in the parlours when they were needed for other things. So we got permission to buy a piece of ground outside the town and to build Cúnmhara on it as it stands today. When somebody comes to the door in Cúnmhara, we ask no questions. We welcome people just as they are and accept them and love them as they are, and allow them the freedom of knowing that they don't have to measure up to anything or anyone, that they can be themselves.
But as we know, there are social problems of every kind, and they're to be found in new situations. For instance, there's a lot of loneliness in suburbia.
I work with families in a new housing estate which consists of about 50 houses in one area and over 60 in another area. I started this work about 8 months ago. From listening to the Gay Burn Hour, reading articles, I came to realise that there were great problems in areas such as the area I work in. So with an open mind I went into the area and I visited all the families. I talked with them. I tried to discover their needs. So I discovered that a lot of the families there had rural backgrounds, came into a new situation, were very alone, if you like, didn't know who lived next door to them, didn't really trust people very much, were slow to make friends. You'd have a young mother there, her husband might be out working from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 in the evening. She might have one young baby who's asleep all day. She's very alone. There's a lot of time in her hands. Now, I see a value in just going in and talking to a woman like this and listening to her. And she feels if somebody is interested enough to do this, well, that life is worth living. And then they're slow, you see, themselves to come forward and make friends. So I think that anything that helps them to come together is good. And I started bringing them together for cookery groups and budgeting and cup of tea, and so I think some of them have got to know one another a bit better, and I've got to know them better in a very natural setting.
I run the Youth Service Centre here in Limerick, and the Youth Service Centre is geared towards meeting the needs of young people in Limerick City and County. We've a variety of young people coming here. They come in their teenage years from 12 to approximately 20, and they come from a variety of backgrounds. Some youngsters come from very disturbed homes where maybe the father or mother, or sometimes in both cases, are alcoholics, and maybe aren't educated that well to sort of meet the needs of the young people we have. Others come from single parent homes. Others come from unemployed homes. And then there are a number of young people who come from normal homes and who just have the sort of normal growing up problems that any young person would have. We run a variety of activities for the young people here. We make it a place where young people can learn skills. Skills, first of all, of meeting one another, helping to relate with each other. They do a variety of programmes, for example, hairdressing, cookery, art and crafts, and then they also have recreational programmes like board games, table tennis, physical education. And we run courses or 5 evening sessions with the parents and the young people together, because I find that part of the problems of young people is that both themselves and their parents aren't really able to relate with each other. So we have these evening programs where the parents and the young people sit down and have a meaningful sort of chat with each other about their problems. I get a great sense of satisfaction from working here. Over the time I have been here, I see a great improvement in the young people. Some of them are very much more at ease and have learned to talk to adults and also to talk to young people of their own age group. And I think that the Youth Service Centre, for some of the young people, provides a sort of a bright light, if you like, in their lives, because it's the only place that they can come and feel welcome.
Obviously, nuns in this area of social work can try and draw out the best in the young people they meet. But there are other, younger children who need very special consideration. Most people know about the sisters' concern for the children of travelling people.
These children come from very poor backgrounds. Very often in the family you've got a drink problem. The father or the mother or both of them are alcoholics. The children are very often left on their own. They're neglected. They come into school and they're very moody and they're irritable. They're poorly fed and their clothes are pretty bad condition. Their concentration is very poor, very short span, and if they don't want to do something, they won't do it. They only want to do a certain amount of everything. The parents of these children now cannot read. You go out to collect the children in the morning and they ask you to read different letters for them. In the beginning, when the school was set up first, they didn't want to send them in, but now, as soon as the child reaches the age of 4, they're glad to get them into school. We teach them basic subjects, religion, reading and arithmetic, and we do home economics with them, cookery, needlework. We also show them how to take care of themselves and how to keep themselves neat and tidy.
Many other youngsters have to be parted from their families for one reason or another and put into what's called in care. This means a residential home run by nuns.
Here we look after children who have been placed in care by the Department of Education or by the Department of Health, and usually the reason for their being placed in care is that they have suffered some kind of family breakdown, maybe due to psychiatric illness of the parents, or maybe the parents are alcoholics. We're trying to create a family atmosphere for the child, an atmosphere that the child has already lost within his own home, and in order to create this we want it to be as near as possible to the ordinary nuclear family. Usually these children have, suffered family breakdown, and I think the parents themselves are inclined to forget about them, so we try to encourage the parents to keep in contact with them. The youngest child we have is 15 months. She's only with us maybe 1 month now. The eldest is 17 years of age. At 17, if they have their leaving cert done, they leave and we get jobs for them. They can stay attached to our place, like we will pay their digs if they're working in another town, and they can come home at weekends whenever they feel like it. Their former background may have been very disturbed and they may have had an awful lot of violence in the family, and we're trying to create a family atmosphere where they feel secure and at home.
One of the most familiar roles for nuns in Ireland is that of the teacher.
I'm principal of a convent secondary school in the city. It is a worthwhile job because we're educating the child who's going to be the mother and many mothers of the future. And while the academic, there is great stress on it at the moment because they're all facing a competitive world, the important part to us is the spiritual side of the student and the psychological side and the artistic and the social and the emotional sides. And all of these are very important because all the girls are gifted in different ways, and in order to give them the very best and to tap what is there, the gifts they've got and how to develop these gifts, we in the school we put great stress on different extracurricular activities which would involve clubs and games and drama and choir and civics. All these things help. If you go in a positive way to them, in an appealing way, building up this self-confidence within them, that they all have gifts of various degrees, that there is a place for everyone, and we put this in front of them, that everyone in the classroom is of equal value in God's eyes, made in his own image and likeness, and give them this confidence that they are going to be fitted for life, as well as the girl who is very good at hitting a ball, or very good in the maths class, or geography, or drama, whatever else. This, to my mind, is the way I approach life and approach the students, and they take on from there, and I think they appreciate what they get. It's very important for us to stay up to date, for example, discussing a film in English class or religion class, or discussing TV program or whatever. And moral standards today, of course, are not like they were yesterday. And in school, I think the girls in a day school, they are very with it in what is going on. For example, at parties, there's a good deal of drink and maybe drugs, and they're faced with many of the evils that are in the world today. And it is our duty, I suppose, as teachers, to put this before them, that while they will come across drink and drugs, they have got to make up their own minds, and they are responsible for themselves.
We're all familiar with what's known as the missions. For years, the sisters have worked overseas, involving themselves in both educational and social matters. And nuns are still active in many countries of the Third World.
We have missions in South Africa, Kenya, India, Mauritius, Spain, Arizona. We have 9 foreign missions. And there we do work, educational work, and we work with orphans. We have a big orphanage in Entally, and the nuns in Entally work with Mother Teresa in ways. Mother Teresa, who was so well known, was with us at the time. We've got to start the basic things, of course, of food and clothes and medicine. We say, like, how important education is, that we're educating the children, then we should be improving the life of the nation in the coming years. On the whole, people are very receptive, but there are, of course, terrible problems. I think the work of any missionary order really is to establish the faith and, so to speak, phase themselves out by training local people and helping local people to become self-sufficient, and to train catechists so that they themselves can spread the faith in their own area. We have seen a good deal of this in modern missionary life. I think particularly, say, the Holy Ghost in the Igbo land in Nigeria, that when they came out, the church was so fully developed that it was well able to carry on. They had a number of their own vocations, and they were self-sufficient. And sisters, of course, play a very important role, because so many of the sisters are dealing with children, and with the children we're dealing with the future of any country, because we're forming the minds. We know how impressionable children are, and we're building them up to build their own country. Like, this is what we mean by our mission work.
Of course, mission work is not all overseas, and more teaching orders are rediscovering their mission at home.
Since the last council, we have been much more aware of our solidarity with the poor. The cry of the poor, I think, has pierced our complacency. And in that, perhaps the young people are more alive to protesting, to causes. They're television kids, after all, and they have been educated by the media to the horrors of hunger, of injustice, of cruelty, of brutality in the world. In that way, they're more alive to it, and we are growing alive to it. So that in our own congregation now, we're working in the shanty towns in South America, we're working in the inner city in New York, we're working in the slums of Barcelona, with the Fellaheen in Upper Egypt, and in our own city, we have several groups of sisters working actually with the poor. Some with the itinerants. Of course, we're only amateurs compared with the great charitable orders like the Sisters of Charity and the French and the Irish, but we're more aware of it. And I find that with the younger nuns, they would prefer to be working with the poor, or doing practical work with the down and outs, than with the chalk and duster in the schoolroom.
Nursing sisters, of course, are the very backbone of many of our hospitals, particularly in the specialised care of the handicapped.
We cater only for disabled people from the ages at the moment of 18 to 98. They include some severely handicapped polio people and multiple sclerosis. We have one blind man. We have 2 epileptic girls who are not really very bad. If they keep to their treatment, they can get on all right. We have 3 amputees and men, and we have a double amputee, a lady. We have 2 arthritics. Now, those who are in the younger group and able to go out to the open field, we train them to drive hand-controlled cars. It's a prerequisite for a job. They're resident of the hostel, and they're obviously going to be placed in various factories here or there, going at different times, coming back at different times. And then there's another facet of it. We like them to feel they're just in digs, and so when the weekend comes, if they're reasonably near, they can take their cars and drive home to their families and spend a week or a fortnight, whatever bit of time they have, a weekend maybe. And, you know, it's great joy for their people to see them coming home, able to drive their own cars, having their own means of livelihood. They do the normal test, and they are not treated with any special leniency, because naturally they are a greater hazard. Though the accident rate for invalids is appreciably below that for able-bodied people. After that then, we have contacted the local industrialists. Some of them have been extremely kind and employ 1 or 2 each. So we have 2 girls working as seamstresses in a local shop. They do the curtains for most of the people in the area. And we have 2 boys working in plastics and 2 mildly handicapped girls. We have, in fact, what I would call, we have made them economically sound, 20 of them. And they earn the normal wage, and they do the normal day's work. As you know, the older people are not able to go to open employment, so for them we provide a comfortable home. And in order that they still maintain a sense of their own worth and dignity, we provide them with some sort of light occupational work for which they are remunerated by the local factories. We have a minibus. We take them down to the seas on Sunday, or we take them maybe to a show, all the shows that come up. We also take them down shopping occasionally. And if there are if they have any relatives in the hospital sick, then we bring them up to visit them too.
There's a special sort of dedication needed for work with the handicapped. But there's something gained too.
Sometimes if I get up in the morning with a very bad headache and so on, very tired and all the rest of it, maybe a bad cold, and I feel grousy, and I get into the bus and I go up to the house and I come inside, and on one side I see a poor fellow with no legs trying to dress, and on the other I see a blind man with his hand out calling somebody to lead him to the kitchen. And then I go inside and I see a girl with only 1 leg. I hear her singing and I see her smiling. And she also, you know, has had a very sad life in many ways. So at that point in time I become enlightened and I stop grousing. And I thank the people for having done this for me. And then I marvel at the grace of God which enables these people to carry the cross He has given them.
It's very apparent that there's great generosity of spirit in the work of nuns. And there's also fulfilment.
So many people talk about self-fulfillment, and one is often asked the question, is there self-fulfillment in religious life? And of course my answer to that, yes, of course there's self-fulfillment in religious life, because we came to religious life freely. We came because we felt God was calling us. We came with a sense of adventure, that we were going to do the best we could with our lives. We all only have one life. We felt this call to help in some way to build a better world. And what better way for me than if I felt God was calling me to be totally His, to come and do the work for Him. Anybody, I believe, can do our work. But I think that what religious are offering is something different, because it's that dedication of the person that I feel that the Lord has called me, that I am offering this to Him, and that I hope this witness is seen in the world, that there are people who live totally for Christ.
thing only took on meaning after, some months and even years in religious life, because the call to be a religious is an ongoing thing, not something that happens once, but it's something that keeps on recurring each day of my life. The call comes to me in the humdrum, ordinary experiences of everyday life.